everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is requested by Future Nurse K. In her second part of her question, she asked for me to make a video on step-by-step guide to 11/7 shifts, so here you go. If you want to know step-by-step what to do on the 11 to 7 shift, sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the show, okay? Let's go. When I first started nursing, I worked 11 to 7 for like 2 years, as some of you guys may already know. But the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come in and make rounds. Come in early so that the other nurse, you know, doesn't have to be like, oh, you have to count. Okay. The second thing is you're going to want to get your report. And another reason why you're going to want to get your report is not just to know what's going on, but if somebody has a stool specimen or your specimen that needs to be collected, you're going to want to know that in advance. And usually they are collected during the night shift because the lab technicians usually come in the morning to pick them up. So you're going to want to know who needs stool collection and who needs urine specimens, because you have to tell the CNAs in advance. Because sometimes if you didn't know that they needed to be collected, if you tell them around, like, let's say 4, 5, or 6, the person may be like, oh, well, the patient had a bowel movement and you didn't let me know, so I just threw it away. So that's why it's so important that you know who needs stool or urine or whatever collected at the beginning of your shift. Okay, so during the night shift, most of the times you will be the only nurse, so you will be the charge nurse of your unit. So you have to keep in mind that you're gonna have to be making the assignment books. For the CNAs, you're gonna have to be giving them their assignment. If you are a new nurse and you're a floating nurse, especially if they have their schedule, like, just let them guide you on how to do it. Like, don't say, oh no, you don't get this. Like, usually they know their assignments, they know their rotation, they're all regulars, so let them help you do it. Don't be that nurse like, oh no, I'm the boss, because believe me, you will need them throughout the night, especially if something happens. Okay, another tip I would give is to actually check your MAR. Okay, everybody should be computerized by now. Check to see how many medications will be given in the morning, especially if you are a new nurse. Most likely you will be floating. Every floor may actually be different. Some floors may have more meds to give in the morning than others. I know it's not as much as morning and evening shift, but you never want to underestimate how many meds that has to be given in the morning, and you want to be finished on time so that the morning shift nurse can just count you out and she could start on time. So definitely check of how many medications will be given in the morning. You don't have to write it down or anything, but just look through everybody's MAR and see how many medications are due on your shift, so that you can kind of approximate like how much time and what time you will need to start giving medications in the morning. Another big thing about night shift is labs, and more labs. Usually the lab technician comes in the morning to see which patient needs blood drawn. So if you have not brought it to the lab technician's attention, then the patient's blood work won't be drawn, and they will say, okay, well, how come this patient's blood wasn't drawn this morning? And they'll say, well, I checked the lab book and I didn't see anybody do. So every nursing home will be different in how you will set up the labs. Basically, you see if any of the patients have an outstanding lab that it needs to be done the next morning, and then you write it in the lab book. So let's say patient Jamie has lab to be done in the morning. What I would do is, like, I would take a lab sheet. Every nursing home has a lab sheet in different parts in the nursing station, and I would take the lab sheet and I would fill it out, and I would write out like exactly what the patient's lab needs to be drawn, and then I would flag it, and then when the lab technician comes, they would see it and they would get the blood drawn and they would check it or like mark it if the patient refused. So, but it's your responsibility to bring it to lab technician's attention by putting it in the lab book, flagging in the patient's chart, however your facility allows it to do. If you're working on a unit where the patient if you're working on a unit where there are some of your patients who are in tracheostomy, some sometimes you will be the one to have to change the canister. It really depends on your facility. Sometimes your CNAs will do it, sometimes you will do it. Make sure you change that canister every night. Usually it is your responsibility, and like sometimes if you don't do it, like nurses will be like, oh, look at that nurse didn't even change it, because you know it's your job as a night shift nurse. So kind of like the night shift is kind of like you restocking everything. You're doing your work also, but you're restocking everything. You're getting ready for the next day, right? So on top of that, on top of changing the tracheostomy canister, you're gonna want to restock the medication cart. So like restock any cups, organize the cart, make sure it's like really nice so that the next nurse can be able to use it without confusion. Restock the finger stick strips. Make sure everything is nice and clean, and make sure your medication cart is where it's supposed to be. Make sure everything inside the medication cart is where it's supposed to be, because in a sense you do have that time within your night shift to do that. If it is a night where you have so much work and just like you have so much disruptions, maybe you're working on a rehab unit, then okay, like that, restocking the medication cart is not top priority, but I would definitely recommend to do that, especially if you want to make a really great impression on your nursing home. Especially if it's a really good nursing home, you want to make a great impression. If you want to be like employed there, like that looks really good when you restock your medication cart and you fix it up at night, because in a sense you do kind of have time to do that. Whereas in the morning and evening shift, you don't really have time to fix the medication cart. I mean, you should for the next nurse that's coming after you, but the night shift, you have more leeway. If you have any patients that are on oxygen that needs to be humidified, make sure you change that water. And if you don't know how to change it, just ask somebody. I don't have it right here with me, but make sure you change that water to make sure like the patient is getting that humidified water, because if that water is below a certain point, then the patient's not really getting that humidified water. And if somebody comes in the morning, it's like sometimes in the middle of the night, for some reason, I don't know if somebody stops it, but you're feeding, right? So usually feeding is put up on 3 to 11 shift. Make sure that the patient continues to get their feeding throughout the night shift, because for some reason the night shift, sometimes the feeding can stop, sometimes it could discontinue. I don't know, like sometimes crazy stuffs happen during the night shift where the feeding stops. And if the morning shift sees that the patient's feeding is all the way up to here when it was supposed to be all the way up to here by the end of the night shift, you can be in big trouble, and the nurse can actually report you for that, and you could get in big trouble, because it's going to be like, okay, well, you were the charge nurse, you were supposed to make sure that that patient was getting their feeding throughout the night. So make sure that, like, you don't have to check like so many times, but make sure you check every couple of hours to make sure that your patient's feeding is still going, because sometimes for example, the CNA can like accidentally stop the feeding, maybe to change the patient or maybe to turn the patient, and they just want that leeway and they forgot to put it back on. Maybe it just stops automatically. You know, feedings can do some wacky things sometimes. So make sure you check your feeding to make sure it's going, because you could get in trouble for that. Also with G2 patients, make sure you change your piston, pump, and syringe. I'll insert a picture of it here. Make sure you change that every night. Sometimes, depending on your facility, the CNAs will change it. Sometimes you will change it. Just make sure it's changed every morning. Usually it has to be dated.